The mysterious death of Tama Horsford, a woman who attended a slumber party and never returned home, continues to haunt many. Was it truly an accident, or was something far more sinister at play that night? This case, first explored on our show in 2021, remains one of our most requested and discussed stories for good reason. The questions still vastly outnumber the answers. As we revisit Tama's story, it serves as a stark reminder of how easily justice can evade us and why we must relentlessly pursue difficult questions, even when the official search for answers ceases. Tamala Street Juror was born on the 10th of October 1978 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a small Caribbean island where she spent her early years surrounded by family and culture. She was one of two daughters, with her sister Summer. In 1989, when Tama was 11, her family left their island home and moved to the Bronx, New York, in search of new opportunities and a better future. There isn't much public information about Tama's life during those years after the move. What we do know is that she eventually met her husband, Leander Horsford, while living in Florida. Leander had a daughter from a previous relationship, and after they married, Tamala gave birth to 5 sons. She embraced motherhood fully, always putting her family first. Leander's job eventually brought the family to Georgia, to the town of Cumming. It's a small, predominantly white community in Forsyth County, a place not exactly known for its diversity or inclusion, but the Horsfords made a life there. Tama quickly adjusted to their new surroundings. She spent her days volunteering at her son's school and driving them to and from after-school activities, especially football and Little League games. She was a hands-on mom, always present, always cheering her boys on from the sidelines. Those who knew Tama described her as warm, kind, and full of life. She had a magnetic personality, the kind of person who made you feel at ease just by being around her. She was funny, charismatic, and the type of woman who would light up a room with her energy. Even though she was one of only a few black women in the area, Tama still found her community. She built friendships with other football moms, bonded over motherhood, and brought joy to those around her. She was the kind of woman who didn't just show up, she truly made an impact. And that's what makes what happened to her so hard to comprehend. By 2018, Tama and her family were well settled in Georgia, and her life was full. Her sons were growing up fast, and her stepdaughter, whom Tama had raised as her own, was now an adult, starting her own life. Things were good. She was doing what she loved most, being a mom, supporting her family, and staying connected to the community. That fall, one of the women Tamala had befriended through her son's football team was planning a birthday celebration. It was going to be Jean Meyer's 45th birthday party, and the plan was to have an old-school pajama party, a sleepover with drinks, food, and fun, a night for the women to relax without worrying about driving home. The party was scheduled for Jean's house on the night of the 3rd of November 2018. Guests were expected to arrive around 7 p.m., but Tama, like most mothers with a house full of children, had things to take care of before heading out. She cooked dinner for her family, ensured everything was in order, and then finally made her way to the party, arriving around 8:30 p.m. Her slightly late arrival was a relatable scenario for many busy parents. According to everyone at the party, Tama walked in and instantly became the life of the gathering. She changed into her pajamas, a cozy white onesie covered in paw prints, and brought along a bottle of tequila, reportedly as a gift for Jean. Most of the women at the party were friends and acquaintances through football, although there were a couple of women Tama didn't know. As the night went on, the women drank, laughed, and played games. The vibe was casual and fun. Reports indicate that Tama was drinking the tequila she brought, and while everyone else was also drinking, several women pointed out that Tama was the only one drinking tequila. This was intended to be a ladies-only event, but Jean's boyfriend, Jose, and another guest's husband ended up staying. The women mostly stayed upstairs while the men watched football in the basement. Eventually, everyone gathered to play Cards Against Humanity, and by all accounts, the energy remained light and happy. Tamala, who was a smoker, periodically stepped out onto the back deck throughout the night to smoke. Photos from the party show her smiling, having fun, and enjoying a night out with friends. There's even a video where she appears to be in good spirits, not overly intoxicated, and other guests later said she didn't seem particularly drunk around 11:30 p.m. Tama FaceTimed her husband to check in, a routine she likely followed when out for the night. After that, things slowly began to wind down at the party. 2 women left not long after, having not planned to stay overnight and needing to get home to their children by about 1 a.m. Most guests had gone to bed. Tama, however, wasn't ready for the party to end. According to those present, she tried to convince people to stay up with her, but eventually, even the last remaining person turned in. Jean and Jose stated they went to bed around 1:30 a.m. At that time, Tamela was still awake with another woman named Bridget. Bridget says she left the party at about 1:47 a.m., and according to her, Tamela was eating a bowl of gumbo and mentioned she was going to smoke one last cigarette before going to bed. The home security system seems to corroborate Bridget's timeline, confirming her departure from the home at 1:47 a.m., but no one else admitted to seeing Tamela alive after that. The next morning, around 8:45 a.m., Jean's aunt, Marlene, who also lived in the home but was not listed as one of the party guests, woke up and began making her morning coffee. While in the basement, she looked out the window and saw something that stopped her cold. Tamela's body, lying face down in the backyard. She told police she could see the white onesie with paw prints and immediately knew something was wrong. She said she dropped to her knees and prayed, then went upstairs to tell Jean and Jose what she had seen. According to reports, she told Jean, "Something is wrong with your friend from the islands," which struck many as a strange way to refer to someone who had been living in the U.S. since she was 11. Although Tama was born in the Caribbean, she had spent nearly 3 decades in the country, making the comment seem out of place, perhaps a softened version of a less polite or insensitive remark made in hindsight. Marlene conveyed what she saw to Jean and Jose, who then reportedly got dressed and went outside. It was clear Tamela was already dead. Just before 9 a.m., Jean placed a 911 call. In the audio, she immediately began offering what sounded like an explanation for Tamela's death before any real questions were even asked, as if setting the narrative from the very beginning. After speaking to the dispatcher, Jean passed the phone to her boyfriend, Jose, who stated that Tamela wasn't moving. The 911 operator then asked if he saw any blood, and Jose responded that he wasn't sure, that he didn't know if he should move her to check for blood underneath. When the dispatcher asked if Tamela was breathing, it became clear that no one had even checked. Consider that Tamela was lying face down in the backyard, and not one person at the scene, people who claimed to be her friends, had made any effort to see if she was still alive. Throughout the call, both Jean and Jose mentioned that Tama had been drinking and speculated that she might have fallen off the balcony. But what stood out most to many who listened to this call was the tone, the complete lack of urgency or distress in their voices. There seemed to be no panic, no desperation, no sense of shock that someone they had just spent the night with was now lying lifeless in their backyard. Instead, the call felt almost clinical, matter of fact, as if they were reporting a broken fence, not the unexpected death of a friend. That lack of emotional response continues to bother people and raises questions about what truly happened to Tama Horsford, because the more one examines the details, the more it becomes apparent that not everything about that night adds up. What happened after the 911 call only deepened the mystery. On the 3rd of November 2018, 40-year-old Tama Horsford attended a birthday party. The next morning, she was found dead in the backyard. Immediately, questions arose about how she died, about the people who were there, and most importantly, about whether this was truly an accident. Approximately 15 minutes after the 911 call, police arrived at the scene. The officers quickly determined that Tama was already dead, and so they informed the EMTs that their presence was no longer needed. From the start, it was clear that the police accepted the homeowner's account that Tama's death was an accident. Consequently, they treated the scene as merely a tragic fall. They did ask many of the party attendees to return later for interviews, but what is shocking is what was not done. No fingerprints were collected, no DNA was taken from underneath Tamila's fingernails, and no procedure was performed to check for a possible sexual assault. The lead detective did note one thing. The position of Tamila's body seemed strange. She was face down, which didn't quite fit with the story of a simple fall. Jean's house was equipped with a security system that logged every door opening and closing, sending notifications directly to her phone. Jean showed investigators the system's log, which revealed something interesting. At 1:49 a.m., the back door leading out to the balcony opened. 1 minute later, at 1:50 a.m., it closed again. Then, 7 minutes later, it opened once more and remained open until Jean and Jose came downstairs the next morning. According to them, the door was simply left wide open. However, this detail raised more questions than answers. As police continued their interviews, the timeline of who left when began to take shape. After Bridget left at 1:47 a.m., the next guest to depart was a woman named Marcy, who left around 4:10 a.m., explaining she had to get to work early. Then, at 7:45 a.m., another guest, Paula, left. Around 8:30 a.m., Stacy and her husband Tom, the other male guest at the party, also left. Jennifer, whose husband had dropped her off and picked her up, also departed around the same time. The pieces of the night's puzzle were beginning to come together, but they only generated more questions about what actually transpired. Although Jean's home was reportedly equipped with video surveillance, it was, ironically, not recording on the night Tama died. 2 hours after police arrived on the scene, Tama was officially pronounced dead. Her body was eventually taken for an autopsy. But even as they awaited the medical examiner's report, police continued to treat Tamila's death as nothing more than an unfortunate accident. The Forsyth County medical examiner supported this narrative, ruling Tama's death accidental and stating she had a blood alcohol level nearly 3 times the legal limit, along with traces of marijuana and Xanax in her system. According to the medical examiner, intoxication likely played a role in her fall. People at the party had told police Tamila was smoking cannabis that night, but that Jean had asked her to stop because of Jose's job. Police later stated they found rolling papers in Tamila's purse. These details were used to reinforce the idea that she was impaired enough to fall to her death. They even pointed to an unlit cigarette found on the porch and the security system door logs to support their conclusion. In their eyes, Tama had gone out to smoke around 1:57 a.m. and then accidentally fell from the balcony. Case closed. But to those who knew and loved Tama, that explanation never made sense. Yes, Tama was known to enjoy herself, and perhaps she had been drinking that night, but no one, not even the people at the party, described her as stumbling, slurring, or sloppy drunk. So, if she wasn't as impaired as they claimed, then why would she simply fall? When the autopsy report returned, the questions only deepened. The medical examiner listed Tamila's injuries as consistent with a fall, but the extent of those injuries raised eyebrows. The balcony she supposedly fell from was approximately 5 to 6 meters high. A fall from that height could certainly cause injury, perhaps even broken bones, but not necessarily be fatal. Tama had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, a broken neck, a dislocated wrist, lacerations to her heart, and multiple scrapes and bruises across her face, fingers, arms, and legs. But here's the thing. Tamala was wearing a long-sleeved fleece onesie. So how did she get cuts on her arms and legs? How did she dislocate her wrist and break her neck, ending up face down from a fall off a relatively low balcony into open grass? Photos from the scene showed no rocks, no bushes, no sharp debris, just grass and a line of mulch bordering the yard. Her body, even if she had fallen, would have landed past that mulch line. There was no indication that she moved after she hit the ground. Still, the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office officially closed the case on the 19th of February 2019. But Tama's loved ones were suspicious from the beginning. The idea that she had simply fallen never sat right with them. They knew her. They knew something was wrong, and there were problems from the start. Her family was never given access to the autopsy photos and was forced to rely solely on the written report to try and piece together what had happened. Then there were the inconsistencies, not just in the investigation, but in what the investigators were telling the family. Early in the case, the lead detective, Mike Christian, told Tamala's father, Kurt Street, Jure, that Tamala's injuries looked like she had suffered a ground fall, meaning she didn't fall from the balcony. In fact, one early police report even stated that officers initially believed she had tripped over some landscaping and then died. But that theory didn't hold up. It made no sense. So, quietly, they changed the story, and the balcony theory was introduced later. Christian admitted that it had been a mistake to tell Tama's father about the original story. But was it truly a mistake, or was it a case of the evidence not matching the version of the story they had decided to pursue? As time went on, Tamala's family and friends increasingly began to question the police investigation and the stories told by the people at that party. Then something happened that changed everything. A photo from that night started circulating online. Tama, the only black woman at a party full of white people, smiling on a couch in her paw print onesie. People online were immediately drawn to her story. The image was unsettling, sparking the first wave of questions across social media about what really happened to Tama Horsford. One of her closest friends became a driving force behind the campaign for justice. Soon, the way the investigation had been handled, or mishandled, was under a microscope. The scene hadn't been properly secured. Police didn't collect key evidence. And while they spoke to people at the scene, formal interviews didn't happen for 2 full days, giving everyone ample time to get their story straight. Yet, those stories still didn't match. According to reports, there were inconsistencies in what guests said, especially regarding what time they woke up. The security system could track door activity, but not who was leaving or moving around inside. One report suggested that Jean's aunt, Marlene, may have been awake as early as 7:30 a.m. Another guest, Jennifer, told police she woke up between 7:30 and 7:45 a.m. and was waiting for her husband by 8 a.m. Jennifer allegedly told investigators that Marlene was awake and acting suspiciously, but Jennifer later changed her statement to match Marlene's timeline. If Jennifer's original version was true, it would mean Marlene may have seen Tama's body almost 2 hours before anyone called 911. Marlene initially stated she found the body when she went outside to check the weather, but later claimed she saw Tama through the window, then prayed before alerting Jean and Jose. There were also questions about the timeline of arrivals. Jean initially told police that Tamala was the last guest to arrive, but that wasn't true. Another woman arrived after Tama. The now infamous group photo on the couch, incidentally, was taken by Marlene before the final guest had even shown up. All these inconsistencies only fueled suspicion. Something about this didn't feel right, and it wasn't just Tamala's loved ones saying it. Even one of the women who left the party early that night told police she couldn't understand how Tamala could have fallen. She stated she had been on that deck 100 times, looked at it from every angle, even when she was drunk, but couldn't figure out how Tama would have fallen. The questionable investigation and the strange behavior of those at the party led many to believe that this was more than just a tragic accident. This was a cover-up. It didn't escape anyone that this was happening in Cumming, Georgia, a town where only 4% of the population is black, a place known for years as a gathering point for white supremacists. For decades, Cumming had been an all-white town, openly hostile to black residents. While the racial makeup of the area had slowly begun to shift, the history remained and still lingered just beneath the surface. So people began to ask, if this had been a white woman found dead at a party full of black people in a predominantly black neighborhood, would the police have treated the case the same way? In the months after Tamala's death, her family and friends did everything they could to keep her story alive, and social media became a powerful tool. But there was one detail that couldn't be ignored, and that was Jose's job. He wasn't just Jean's boyfriend. He was a former probation officer and, at the time, worked in pre-trial services. In a small town like Cumming, that meant he very likely knew and possibly had influence with the very officers investigating Tama's death. As attention to the case grew, people who attended the party started to receive death threats. Eventually, some of them filed a lawsuit against one of Tama's vocal supporters, accusing her of putting them in danger by naming them and sharing their photos online. But that lawsuit was ultimately dismissed. In December 2018, just a month after Tamala's death, Jean's boyfriend, Jose, was fired from his job as a pre-trial services officer. The reason? He had been caught trying to access files related to Tama's case, records he had no business looking at. To the public, this only added to the growing suspicion around him. Why try to access the files unless you were trying to control the narrative or hide something? But by that time, police had already closed the case, and Tama's story had already started to fade from the headlines. Like so many other cases involving black women, the interest didn't last. However, in 2020, amid a national reckoning around racial justice and police accountability, Tamala's case came roaring back into the public conversation. That now infamous photo of her, the only black woman at a sleepover with all white guests, started circulating online once again, sparking new outrage. This time, it caught the attention of celebrities like 50 Cent, T.I., and Kim Kardashian, who all used their platforms to demand answers and call for a new investigation. Then, on the 5th of June 2020, the Horsford family attorney released a statement after completing their own independent investigation into Tamala's death, and what they found was alarming. The letter read, quote, "Witness statements are in conflict. A potential subject handled the body, as well as the evidence prior to law enforcement arrival. A remarkable fact is that there were no photographs taken during the autopsy of Tama's body. This had been done at someone's directive because such a practice is unheard of." The letter also stated plainly that there was strong reason to believe that Tamala had been murdered. Just 1 week later, under mounting public pressure and renewed attention, the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office asked the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to take over the case. By the summer of 2020, the GBI had officially reopened the investigation into Tamala's death. For a brief moment, there was hope that maybe this time the truth would finally come out. But as the months passed, the headlines once again quieted. Like so many social justice movements online, the momentum faded and people moved on to the next story. Still, Tamala's family and friends held on. They were hopeful that the GBI's involvement as an outside agency would bring real answers, that this time they wouldn't be ignored. But that hope was short-lived. On the 26th of July, 2021, Just over a year after the GBI began their investigation, they announced their conclusion. They would not be filing any charges, and they agreed with the original finding that Tama's death was nothing more than a tragic accident. Once again, Tama's loved ones were left with more questions than answers. And once again, they made it clear that they do not accept the findings. They do not believe that Tama's death was an accident, and they have vowed to continue fighting for answers, for truth, and for justice. It's been almost 7 years since Tama went to a birthday party and never came home. To this day, there are still many unanswered questions about what happened that night. From the beginning, the story given was that Tamala accidentally fell from a balcony after a night of drinking. But for many, that explanation has never fully made sense. What's often overlooked is who Tama was. Beyond the headlines and speculation, she was a devoted mother of 6, including her stepdaughter, who was pregnant at the time with what would have been Tamala's first grandchild. She was a wife, a friend, and someone deeply loved by those around her. Despite the ruling that her death was accidental, those closest to Tamala have continued to raise concerns about the investigation, from how the scene was handled to the conflicting witness statements, to the injuries detailed in the autopsy report. They have not accepted that this was an accident. Nearly 7 years later, they are still searching for answers. Her story remains important not only because of how she died, but because of the fight to understand why. And until that fight ends, her story will continue to be told. May Tama Horsford rest in peace. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Threads.